We are seeing your screen. Over to you.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Yeah, my name is Paloma Hanlon. I was the Action Research Lead for the mindfulness strand of Action Research at GB Met in partnership with Worthing College. Our question was to investigate how Maths GCSE students respond to a short course on mindfulness, focusing on how it affects their experiences in the classroom and in tests. I took over the mindfulness strand of Action Research towards the end of the first term in the last academic year. So Chelsea Lavelle had started the project and done some of the design and had overseen a lot of the training. And then I took over in the implementation phase, pretty much. So what is mindfulness? Well, I'm sure everyone has heard of it. I'm sure lots of people on this call have had some sort of experience of it. Either they've got a really well-established practice or they've used an app such as Headspace or Calm. For the purpose of our research, we can define it as a set of practices to help us be more present in our daily lives. So these can be guided by another person or a recording, or they can be self-guided practices. The practices focus on the breath and the body as a jumping off point to explore sensations, emotions, thoughts, and impulses that are happening in the here and now. So generally, it can be seen as a way of accepting our experiences and making thoughtful choices about how to respond to them. So given that definition, you might already have a sense that this could be quite useful to young people. What the literature says about it, well, there are quite a few studies that suggest mindfulness is beneficial to the well-being of young people as a whole. I think we all can see how that would help them to access learning. There is also some research that suggests it can help students academically, specifically to focus longer and to regulate their behavior. There is little research into the impact of mindfulness on maths attainment in particular. But there is one recent study that was done in the US for community college students who were taking statistics, and they found that a program of mindfulness combined with growth mindset led to a reduction in maths anxiety and an increase in maths self-efficacy. The research around delivery of mindfulness in educational settings also stressed that mindfulness sessions are more effective when delivered by teachers who have a well-developed practice already. In fact, they found experienced teachers who already have their own mindfulness practice are the best people at delivering this. So the reduction of maths anxiety was the response that we wanted to target and measure. And this last point about when is it most effective informed our training plan. So our plan, this was our plan. So to recruit teachers to develop their own mindfulness practice in the first place, train to teach the Mindfulness in Schools project .breathe 4-lesson course, then deliver the .breathe course within their maths classes. So the students wouldn't get a choice. They would just pick some classes, deliver the sessions, and hopefully do 2 or 3 rounds of this with different classes and collect data. So keep a reflective journal, feedback during the reviews, contribute to the final report, and collect data from their students. Just so that you know what the sessions were like, so the Mindfulness in Schools project 4-course .breathe session, each session uses a PowerPoint presentation, which then has some embedded animations and guided practices in it. So video files and sound files that you can use during the session. But it is led by the teacher. There's an emphasis on class discussion and what's called enquiry. So enquiry happens at the end of practices, and it allows students to notice and explore the sensations that arose during the practice and then link it to the aim of the practice, the intended aim of the practice. We had, so the 4 sessions in .breathe are training the mind, working with worry, sleep, and connections with others. So those were the themes of the 4 sessions. And every session involved some aspect of physiology. So students were learning about how their body responds to stress and worry, and also neuroscience. So they were learning about how their brain responds to stress and worry and interacts with their physiological responses. And also they were learning metacognition. So thinking about their own thinking. The plan in terms of data collection was that all participating students would take a short maths test. We decided on that because we knew that the GCSE results might be a bit difficult to use as a measure in that they weren't typical. So, we're going through a pandemic and COVID. We thought that we would put something else in place as an indicator of maths efficacy. So we wanted to look at a short maths test and also ask about anxiety at that point. So there's a maths anxiety scale questionnaire. So all students are meant to do this before they have the sessions, then we deliver the 4.brief sessions, and then they do it again afterwards. And then also there was a bit more feedback about what they thought about the sessions in that second round of survey. And the aim was to have interviews as well, 2 students per teacher, a short interview just to go into it a little bit in more depth. So that was the plan in terms of data collection. This was the project plan. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through this. Look at Lou's face. This is just to prove this is the coordination of what we were doing. Oh, and that was the idea. And then COVID had other ideas. So yeah, don't try this at home. We had to adapt on the fly, the best laid plans after getting the day, as they say. Some of the teachers that were trained in the first half of the project were not able to participate. A couple of people changed jobs. One person was vulnerable, so they were doing intervention work remotely, so they didn't have groups to work with anymore. They were doing lots of one-to-one stuff with students. There was increased stress and strain in departments, and that led to some of our partner colleges backing out of the project completely because they just didn't have the time to dedicate to the action research. Personal circumstances also played a part. People's own health or that of loved ones made them back out of the project. So we ended up with quite a few trained teachers actually leaving the project, which means we had to train new teachers. We had to start sessions later in the year. Then lockdown happened. Some sessions had to be online. We also lost quite a bit of contact time with our students due to self-isolation. There was more pressure on class time. And the assessments came up earlier in the year than in previous years. And at least at GBMet, we were doing more assessment to make sure we had some robust data for the teacher assessed grades. So there was just a huge crunch on class time. So the new normal for me was that I ended up delivering 4 sessions online to 2 groups over the course of 5 weeks. One group was mixed in terms of gender and vocational area. The other group was mostly male motor vehicle learners. Yes, I went there. It was 45 minutes for the first half of an online session, and the students had their cameras off. This is a policy I was already using in my live online sessions because students weren't necessarily adhering to proper online etiquette, let's say. So they had their cameras off. Because of that, it was quite difficult to get a group rapport. So it's difficult to get students to volunteer thoughts and experiences during the actual discussions. It was especially hard to get students to share their experiences during inquiry. So that means it was hard to gauge how the practices were received. And a tumbleweed illustrates that quite well. Paula Wheeler, her new normal was different from mine. She actually ended up delivering her sessions face-to-face after we came back from lockdown within 3 weeks, sort of during or after the bulk of the assessments, her assessments were finished. So students didn't attend consistently because of the time of year. They were having other A-level assessments going on. They felt like they were done. And COVID measures also caused some issues within those sessions. So practices where you have to lie down were a bit awkward. In larger groups, students had to wear face coverings. So that had a big impact on how they were received as well. Just to dive into the data a little bit at this point, the mental maths test was not really as useful as we thought it might be. Generally, when we got the scores back, students were already scoring quite highly on it. So 50% of students scored 9 or higher out of a 10-mark test. So really, how much they were going to shift on this is going to be hard to use in any useful way. Also, my students were doing it at home, or some of them were doing it independently. And I suspect some of them were using calculators because I know my own students. And also there was a low level of anxiety reported about the test. So it just didn't end up being as useful as we thought it might be. So we took most of our data from the Maths Anxiety Scale questionnaire. So just to give you a bit of an insight into how the questionnaire was structured, it was designed to measure 3 different types of maths anxiety. So maths evaluation anxiety, such as taking tests or quizzes or being put on the spot in class. So being evaluated, that was one kind of maths anxiety. Everyday or social maths anxiety, so making change, working with time, splitting a bill, things like that. And then maths observation anxiety, which is a more passive, watching someone else do maths or hearing people talk about maths, just being in a classroom environment. And the students were asked to scale how anxious they would feel. So 1 would be not at all, 5 very much. 3, some students might have interpreted that as a neutral, but also it's still a fair amount of anxiety being felt. Just to give you a little bit of a view about, so the Worthing cohort, at this point, I would say once data cleaning was done and the impact of non-attendance at various different sessions was taken into account, we did have a really small cohort from which we were drawing data, which I'll talk about more in a bit. But here is the data from what we got. We grouped all the responses in terms of evaluation anxiety, everyday and social anxiety, and observation. And you can see pre-intervention, evaluation anxiety was definitely the one that was, there was a higher level of anxiety reported than the other 2 types. It is the one that dropped the most in post-intervention surveys as well. So it went from 3.25 down to 2.83 rather, sorry. The individual scenario with the biggest drop was being given a surprise math test in class, which dropped from 3.9 to 2.9. So from much anxiety to a fair amount of anxiety about a surprise math test in class. One thing that was interesting is this increase in everyday and social anxiety, which I just find fascinating and bears looking into. It may just be a blip because it's a really small, data set, but yeah, it's just fascinating. I would like to know what's going on there. Just to share some of the students' views on the usefulness. So in the second survey that we did, we asked them to select different aspects of the program that they found useful. So the most popular one was the mindfulness meditations we did in class. And then second most popular was home practices, which was news to me because when I was asking my students if they were doing anything, it was tumbleweeds, but they were, and they valued it. So that was really good information to get out of that data. So some headlines of what we've learned. It's really hard to actually say specifically, this is what we've learned because it's such a small data set, but we know and value for the respondents that we got, evaluation anxiety was lower after mindfulness sessions. Everyday social anxiety was higher. Students may take advantage of opportunities to practice mindfulness in class when they would otherwise feel too busy. That came out of one of those interviews, so a case study. And we know that the majority of respondents, so 57%, felt it was a good use of class time. So 57% either strongly agreed or agreed that it was a good use of class time. What we would change, lots of things. We wouldn't have a pandemic in the middle of it for a start, but also we'd deliver sessions at the beginning of the year. We would make sure that we had students using webcams if we had to deliver online. Longer lead-in time for newly trained teachers. I mean, that was obviously planned in, but then we had to train teachers up halfway through the project as well. So then they maybe didn't feel quite as confident in delivering because they hadn't built up their practice as much. To have a time set aside for students to come to the teacher afterwards if anything comes up during the sessions, to have that sort of earmarked and very clear that that's what that's for. This one, the sell the concept more is more of, for me, Paul is a natural salesperson, probably sold it a lot more. I was really worried about biasing the students because I was thinking we're doing research. I don't want to over egg this, but I think in future I would, and then just put that in the report as perhaps a contributing factor. But I think it's probably better to get more of them more engaged than to try and not bias them. And Paula and I both talked about some of the tweaks to the resources that we'd like to consult with the Mindfulness in Schools project about. They're very proprietary about the resources. They don't want you to take the program that they've carefully developed and mess about with it. So we would have to consult with them before we made any changes for the delivery to our students. What next? Look, there's just not enough data to push for a whole college approach. We could run the sessions. So Paula and I are both up for just carrying on with the sessions and continuing to collect data, even though it's not part of an active action and research project, just for our own geeky purposes, but also just to try and convince the senior leadership team to maybe train up more teachers to deliver mindfulness. So we would continue stealing class time to deliver the 4-session course. I'm trained to deliver the longer 10-week course. So I plan to offer that over lunch breaks to students who are interested. And generally, overall, we're just going to keep meditating. That's us done.